So in our last video, we talked about fleshing out the opening hours of Rebirth, how events could unfold, how things could change, basically going from Calm to the Chocobo Farm to the battle with the Midgar Zalem, and then exiting those Mithril Caves. Now, I didn't talk about characters in that last video, so I want to talk about the rest of your party in this video, as well as how more areas could potentially change with Rebirth. Now, there's a good chance that the story of Rebirth will span the events from Calm, leading all the way to the Northern Crater where Cloud goes sicko mode and gives Sephiroth the Black Materia. That was something that had been speculated by Maximilian Dood, and since his batting average for this series has been nearly perfect, I'm gonna base my speculation off of that story structure. So starting off with something I didn't mention in the first game, and that's Yuffie. It makes all the sense in the world for Yuffie to be introduced at the beginning of Rebirth. Why? Well, in the original game, when you encounter her, she takes all your stuff, but considering that's towards the middle of the game, you have a chance to get all that stuff back. In Rebirth, they're gonna need a reason to explain why our characters are suddenly weak. They don't have all the weapons and materia that they had from the last game, and why they're probably starting from level 1 or potentially level 7 in Rebirth. Having Yuffie show up at the Calm Inn makes all the sense in the world. So Cloud tells the events of what he thinks happened at Nibelheim. Everyone's exhausted at the journey so far. They fall asleep, and in comes Yuffie. We've already seen Yuffie walking around out in the open world. It only makes sense that she would make her way to Calm. So maybe she's been tailing Cloud and crew. She sees how valuable some of their assets are. She swipes all your materia and makes a beeline for Wutai. Now after that, everyone wakes up and they realize, oh crap, we've been jacked. Now we're starting at level 1. We then continue the events to the Chocobo Farm, the battle with the Midgar Zalem, and the Mithril Caves. Now this is where things could potentially change. Now in the original game, after you left the Mithril Mines, you made your way to Junin. You then did a little dance there, you got on a cargo ship, did some battles with a Genova creature, and then you made your way to Costa del Sol. Now, I think this would be a really cool opportunity to kind of change the structure a little bit. So upon leaving the Mithril Mines, perhaps you catch wind of Yuffie, and this would be a really great opportunity to go to Wutai. So now you're going to learn more about Yuffie, well, the party will learn more about Yuffie, and you'll get some backstory, but you could also reintroduce that Sonon element. So, spoiler alert, in intermission, Sonon, Yuffie's partner, unfortunately dies. He sacrifices himself to save Yuffie, but his body is taken over by Nero. Yuffie does not know that second half of the story. She thinks Sonon is dead. So as you're making your way through Wutai, having Yuffie catch glimpses of who she thinks is Sonon could really mess with her head and add so much more to that location. And you could even change it to where instead of Yuffie battling her family, she could end up battling Sonon to save Wutai. Maybe Nero is there and he wants to cause some destruction. Maybe the Turks show up as well. But that would be a really cool early area to really get to know Yuffie, battle Sonon, and also allow characters to upgrade your weapons at an earlier point in time. Now, after leaving Wutai would be a really great opportunity to introduce Cosmo Canyon. Now, Cosmo Canyon is going to have a lot of story significance in this trilogy because A, we learn more about Red 13's backstory, but who else is at Cosmo Canyon that is going to be really in tune with the timeline and the planet itself? That's Bugenhagen. It's got a great name, by the way. So when you get to Cosmo Canyon, I would fully expect Bugenhagen to catch on to what's going on. He's going to know that something is not quite right. Something is different this time around. And perhaps that's where we get a lot of story exposition to where Bugenhagen can somehow explain what's going on with the planet and how Sephiroth is potentially messing with events this time around. It's also a really cool place to introduce a mid-game high-level dungeon, and that would be the Cave of the Gi. So in the original game, the Cave of the Gi is a pretty terrifying place to go. It's underneath Cosmo Canyon. There are tons of undead, powerful creatures. There's a boss that's a bit of a pushover if you know how to use your potions and healing spells correctly, so perhaps they could rework that to make it a much more formidable boss. That would be a really great area to leave as a dungeon towards the middle of the game. So we get our story exposition at Cosmo Canyon. We learn more about Red 13 and his backstory with his father, and then after that, what would be the next place to go? Just like in the original game, Nibelheim. Now, why are we going to Nibelheim? A number of things. Again, story events, which are very important to the game's main story, but also you need to get Vincent. And this time around, characters like Yuffie and Vincent are not going to be optional. These guys are going to be mandatory this go around. We head to Nibelheim, do some investigating in that Shinra mansion, come across Vincent, jump through some hoops probably to have him join our party, and now we have Vincent in our party at Nibelheim. Now, as far as these characters go, I would expect Yuffie to play very close to how she played in the intermission DLC. She was honestly probably the most fun character to use. Perhaps the second would be Tifa, but Yuffie was just so much fun. She was so well balanced. She could fight all enemy types, whether they be in the air or on the ground. She was fast and agile, and her ninjutsu stuff allowed her to target those air enemies or ground enemies and even use elemental attacks. So she was very well varied. Interestingly enough, the developers did say that none of the character models from Remake have really been fine-tuned or changed all that much for Rebirth, minus Yuffie. So what changes they made to Yuffie, we won't know until we see her. Maybe she's going to look a little bit different. Maybe her gameplay style might change a little bit as well to kind of fit more into a party type atmosphere. In the original game, Vincent was pretty versatile, although his magic stats were pretty high if I remember correctly. So in this game, I could see him working as more of a faster, maybe slightly weaker version of Barrett. So he's going to be able to flip and dip around the battlefield. I would expect his basic square attack probably to be his gun, and triangle could be a number of things. It could either be a melee combat attack where he's punching and kicking, or it could be something related to his limit break. Maybe you have the ability to charge up his limit break faster, leading to the actual limit break. So in the original Final Fantasy VII, Vincent's limit break was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, he would transform into this really powerful creature, but when he did that, you lost all control of him until the very end of the battle or until Vincent died. So you can kind of play around with that. Perhaps once Vincent reaches his limit break, he transforms, you lose control of him, but he acts more like a summon attack. So although you cannot control him, you can maybe still issue him some commands, and his limit itself wouldn't last for the duration of the battle, but instead would have a timer on it, much like the summons. And once that timer runs out, he unleashes a big attack and he returns to his normal self. So then after the events of Nibelheim, who's the last character we have to get? That's going to be Cid, and I would expect to head to Rocket Town next, which is actually the original order of events in the original game. It's Cosmo Canyon, Nibelheim, and then Rocket Town. So it's very well likely that we could get Cid in this game. I don't know if they would reserve Cid for DLC, since, like I said before, this game is most likely going to end at that northern crater section where the world is just ending and everything's going nuts. So getting Cid in Rebirth makes all the sense in the world as well. As for how Cid is going to play, I would expect him to be very similar to Sonon. I actually really believe that Sonon was made as a blueprint for Cid. They're both dragoon characters that use lances and staves to fight, so I would expect him to be somewhat similar to Sonon, but of course he's going to have those signature abilities that he had in the original game. I expect him to still be a bit of a rough asshole, but I think they're going to tone down just a tiny bit on his penchant for abusing women, so to speak. That's how I flesh out that section. And then after Rocket Town, I honestly see the original events of the game playing out. So maybe you do head to Junin, and then you get on the cargo ship and do battle with Genova, and then you make it to Costa del Sol, and then stuff like the Golden Saucer, Mount Corral, that's saved for the latter end of the game, till eventually you reach the point of the Northern Crater. So that's how I think Rebirth could potentially play out. I'm sure there's tons of stuff that could happen in between, but that's pretty much the video. I would really love to hear your guys' thoughts on Rebirth. How do you think this game is going to be structured? Do you think we're going to get Cid at the end of this game? How do you think Yuffie and Vincent and Cid will control? And what story events do you think will change? Do you agree with my structure of how Rebirth is going to go? Or do you think they're going to change things up? I would love to hear what you guys have to think in the comments down below. I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.